How does a concentration camp guard spend 40 years married to a Holocaust survivor without him ever finding out? What would a Nazi soldier have to do for the SS itself to demand his removal? 15 names, 15 trials, 15 different endings. Some died on the gallows, others died free, decades later without ever answering for any of it. Welcome back to History in Focus. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you don't miss more videos like this one. Now, let's get into it.
Number 1. Oskar Dirlewanger was born on September 26, 1895, into an ordinary German family, with no sign of abuse, hunger, or trauma that would explain what came later in his life. In the First World War, he was wounded several times and earned the Iron Cross for advancing when others kept falling back. His superiors noted his aggressiveness as a valuable military quality. Nobody there saw any problem in it. That was about to change, and fast, as soon as peace finally arrived. With the end of the war in 1918, most soldiers returned to civilian life. Dirlewanger did not. He joined a Freikorps, a paramilitary group of veterans that kept suppressing German politics with street violence. At the same time, he studied at the University of Frankfurt and finished his doctorate in 1922. Education, social standing, real opportunity. He had all of it available to him. What he lacked was not circumstance at all. It was something else, and nobody there knew how to name it. In October of 1934, a court in Stuttgart sentenced Dirlewanger to 2 years in prison for abusing a minor. He lost his job, his doctoral title, his military honors, and was expelled from the Nazi Party immediately. Shortly after leaving the Ludwigsburg jail, he was arrested again on a similar charge and sent to the Welsheim detention camp. His criminal record, by that point, was already complete, public, and documented on paper. A man with that record should have vanished from German public life. Instead, Gottlob Berger, a senior SS officer, saw in him the solution to a practical problem, putting together a unit made of convicted criminals, people who no longer had much to lose. Before recommending Dirlewanger for the command, Berger knew the entire record. The criminal record was erased, the doctorate reinstated, the political standing restored. In 1940, the unit was formed with about 300 men, nearly all of them former convicts. Its internal structure gave almost total freedom of action, with no real oversight. When they arrived in occupied Poland that same year, the first reports of looting and executions with no military justification came from within the SS itself. Formal investigations were opened against Dirlewanger 6 times over the course of the war. All 6 times, an order from above shut down the process before any real punishment. In Belarus, the operation became a fixed routine. A village surrounded at dawn, the men shot first, the women and children locked inside barns that were then set on fire. Historical estimates point to tens of thousands of dead in that region alone, with hundreds of villages destroyed. In August of 1944, the brigade was sent to the Wola district in Warsaw, with orders to eliminate the civilian population. Within a few days, tens of thousands of people died in a small area of the city. Weeks after Wola, in September of 1944, Dirlewanger received the German Cross in gold, one of the regime's highest military honors. Wounded in combat in February of 1945, he tried to flee in disguise when the war ended. He was captured by French troops in May, out of uniform, using a false name, registered as an ordinary prisoner. Among the prison guards were Poles. The death certificate records, June 7, 1945. He died in custody, with no trial, no proceedings. Number 2. Karl-Otto Koch was born on August 2, 1897, and commanded the Buchenwald concentration camp from 1937 to 1941. Together with his wife Ilse, he used the entire structure of the camp to build up a considerable personal fortune. Parties, jewelry, imported furniture, all paid for with goods confiscated from prisoners. The two of them lived a standard of living completely out of step with the rest of the German war effort at that time. Within the SS, nobody seemed to mind much, for the time being. The death toll at Buchenwald kept climbing under Koch's command, but that was never what worried the SS leadership. What actually caught the superiors' attention was something quite different. Diverted money, jewelry confiscated from prisoners that never reached the official coffers of the German Reich. In 1943, a judge within the SS itself was given a direct order to thoroughly investigate everything happening inside that particular camp. The judge's name was Georg Conrad Morgan. On August 24, 1943, he had the Koch couple arrested that same day. The investigation took months and revealed a systematic scheme for diverting goods confiscated from prisoners, disguised as ordinary camp administration. Morgan also uncovered something far more serious: the murder of inmates used to erase evidence carried out on Koch's direct orders, with no official authorization from the SS at all. On August 17, 1944, Morgan formalized the full indictment of the case. Karl Koch was accused of embezzling at least 200,000 German marks in camp goods, and of ordering the murder of 3 inmates to keep them from testifying against him in court. His wife was accused of receiving and using part of those goods, valued at 25,000 German marks. Notice the detail. None of the formal charges mentioned the mass deaths happening right there, inside that same camp, every single day. A tribunal of the SS itself tried the case and sentenced Karl Koch to death, not for the mass executions he routinely authorized as commander. The sentence spoke of dishonoring himself and dishonoring the SS uniform. It was an internal legal system working at full capacity, just aimed in the wrong direction, capable of punishing theft severely, while at the same time allowing, with no consequence at all, the mass extermination happening right outside that courtroom. Karl-Otto Koch was shot inside Buchenwald itself on April 5, 1945, 1 week before American troops arrived and liberated the entire camp. He died as a criminal condemned by the very organization he had served for 8 years, for a crime far smaller than any of the ones he committed daily while in command. His wife, Ilse, was acquitted by that same internal SS tribunal in the 1944 trial. Her story, though, was only just beginning. Number 3. Christian Wirth was born on November 24, 1885, the son of a cooper from rural Germany, and served as a police officer before the war fully began. He came out of the Nazi euthanasia program, where he helped develop methods of industrial-scale extermination. In December of 1941, he became the first commandant of the Belzec camp in occupied Poland, and spent months testing and refining the process of mass killing until it ran with no visible flaws. Within the SS staff itself, Wirth was feared, and not only by the prisoners of the camp. A subordinate described decades later that he would scream, threaten, and even slap German guards in the face for any minor slip in the work. The Jews and prisoners who passed through Belzec nicknamed him Christian the Terrible. There was no one there, German or Ukrainian, who was not afraid of him. That included even his own fellow officers, trained to fear nothing. On August 1st, 1942, Wirth was promoted to inspector of the 3 Action Reinhard camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. He began directly overseeing the entire mass extermination operation in occupied Poland. The final report he himself produced, submitted in January of 1944, showed that Action Reinhard had brought in 178 million marks to the coffers of the German Reich, in goods confiscated from Jewish victims killed at those 3 camps. In November of 1943, Wirth personally commanded Action Erntefest, the Harvest Festival, the execution of all remaining Jews in the labor camps of the Lublin district, in a single operation. It was he who read Himmler's order aloud to the officers gathered there. After that, he was transferred to Trieste, his next base, where he had a crematorium built inside a former rice mill used as a detention and torture camp for captured partisans and civilians. On May 26, 1944, Wirth was killed by Yugoslav partisans near Herpelia Kozina on his way to inspect one of his units in the region. Franz Stangl, who had served under his command at 2 different extermination camps, later stated he had seen the body himself with no doubt at all. Wirth was buried with full military honors in a German cemetery in Italy, the most feared man of the entire action. Reinhard died as a war hero, and was laid to rest exactly as one. Number 4. Odilo Globocnik was born on April 21, 1904 in Trieste, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, into a modest family of civil servants. He was Gauleiter of Vienna between 1938 and 1939, a post he lost over proven corruption within the Nazi Party itself. Himmler, even so, appointed him chief of SS and police for the Lublin district in occupied Poland. It was there that he designed the entire Action Reinhard from scratch, with his name tied to the project from the very start. Globocnik was the one who chose the locations of the 3 extermination camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, and who appointed Christian Wirth to run the operations on the ground. He was also the one who recruited Franz Stangl into the whole system back in 1942. It is estimated that about 1.5 million European Jews died in the camps he personally engineered between 1942 and 1943. After closing out those figures, he presented the report on profits from confiscated goods to the SS leadership. In September of 1943, Himmler transferred him back to Trieste, the same city where he had been born in 1904, now as senior chief of SS and police for the entire Adriatic coastland. There, he directed the persecution of Italian Jews and operations against partisans along the border with Yugoslavia, using a former rice mill as a detention center. The city that saw him born became the last stage of his career. Few historians have recorded a greater irony than that in the whole of Action Reinhard. With the Allied advance in 1945, Globocnik fled to the mountains of Austrian Carinthia and hid in an isolated cabin near Lake Weissensee, along with a few trusted men. A British armored cavalry unit located him on May 31st of that year, Before the interrogation could even begin, he bit down on a hidden cyanide capsule and died instantly, right there. A local priest refused to allow the body to be buried in consecrated ground. Number 5. Amon Göth was born on December 11, 1908 in Vienna, capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time. He took command of the Płaszów labor camp in occupied Poland at the turn of 1943. The prisoners learned fast. When he appeared in the distance, everyone hid wherever they could, a latrine, a barrack, any available corner. His reputation for terror did not come from rumor. It came from daily routine, witnessed by hundreds of people at the same time. Göth shot from the balcony of his own office at prisoners he considered too slow at their work down below. He killed a cook because the soup was too hot for his taste. 2 women, Helen Hirsch and Helen Jonas, worked as his domestic servants and lived in constant fear for their own lives, every day, without exception. Both survived the war and later testified against him, with a wealth of detail nobody expected to hear spoken aloud. On September 3, 1943, Göth commanded the complete liquidation of the Tarnów ghetto, which had been home to 25,000 Jews before the war began. According to witnesses heard at his later trial, he personally killed between 30 and 90 women and children in that specific operation, by shooting them himself. The survivors were taken by train to Auschwitz. Less than half arrived there alive. Most of those who remained were killed as soon as they stepped off the train, with no selection beforehand. After the war, Göth was extradited to Poland and tried in Krakow between August and September of 1946 by the Polish Supreme National Tribunal. His defense was the usual one. Every execution had the authorization and knowledge of his superiors. The tribunal rejected the argument without hesitation. Göth was convicted of personally killing, mutilating, and torturing a substantial number of people, along with crimes against humanity and membership in the Nazi Party. That conviction for personal homicide was the first of its kind recorded in a war crimes trial anywhere in the world up to that specific moment. Unlike other officers who hid behind superior orders as a standard defense, Göth's record left little room for doubt. He pulled the trigger himself, frequently with no strategic need at all. The Polish tribunal sentenced the commandant of Płaszów to death by hanging on September 5th. 1946. Amon Göth was hanged on September 13th, 1946, at Montelupec prison in Krakow, just a few miles from the very camp he had commanded for nearly 2 years. His companion, Ruth Calder, defended her husband's memory for decades until giving a long interview on the subject in 1983. Shortly after that interview, she took her own life. The couple's daughter spent the rest of her life truly trying to understand the father she had practically never known. Number 6. Josef Blösche was born on February 12, 1912, in a region of the former Bohemia. Starting in September of 1941, he served as a guard at the Warsaw Ghetto, responsible for the wooden bridge that connected the occupied city to the sealed-off Jewish area. He became known there by a nickname the residents themselves had come up with, Frankenstein. The reason was not just his appearance. It was his daily behavior, repeated, too predictable to be pure chance or coincidence. Blösche beat and shot men and children just for looking the wrong way. Survivors reported, after the war, that he also sexually assaulted women inside the ghetto before killing them. During the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, in April and May of 1943, he was photographed pointing a submachine gun at a group of surrendered civilians, among them a small boy with his hands raised. That specific image would become, decades later, a global symbol of Nazi horror. In August of 1946, Blösche suffered a serious work accident that permanently deformed part of his face. Without meaning to, that became real protection. The SS soldiers photographed at the Warsaw Uprising were being sought precisely by their recognizable faces. He went back to his parents' home, got married, had 2 children, and lived an ordinary life in East Germany for nearly 20 straight years, with nobody around him suspecting what he had done during the war. In 1961, a former SS colleague on trial in Hamburg for other war crimes mentioned Blösche's name in courtroom testimony. The information reached the East German police, who opened their own investigation into his whereabouts. He was located and arrested by the Stasi on January 11, 1967, more than 20 years after the war ended, living quietly just a few miles from where he had grown up as a child, without ever having been questioned before. Tried in Erfurt, Blösche was sentenced to death on April 30, 1969, found guilty of taking part in the deportation of 300,000 Jews and of the direct murder of up to 2,000 people over the course of the war. The sentence was carried out in Leipzig on July 29, 1969, with a single shot to the back of the neck. The nickname he had carried since the Warsaw Ghetto would go on to become, decades later, the title of an entire German documentary dedicated to his case. Number 7. Friedrich Wilhelm Krüger was born on May 8, 1894 in Strasbourg, the son of a German army colonel killed in the First World War. He himself was wounded 3 times in that conflict and received the 1st and 2nd class Iron Cross for bravery. On October 4th, 1939, Himmler appointed him senior chief of SS and police for the general government, the newly occupied Poland. Krüger became, overnight, one of the most powerful men in the entire region. In that post, Krüger organized and oversaw the liquidation of the Jewish ghettos scattered across the general government, including direct authority over the extermination operations at the concentration camps in the region under his command. When the Warsaw Ghetto was liquidated in April and May of 1943, General Jürgen Stroop, directly in charge of the operation on the ground, reported the daily updates to him first, before any other superior in the chain of command. In November of 1943, Krüger lost his post, not because of any of the crimes he himself had commanded over those 4 years. He fell victim to a power struggle with Hans Frank, the Governor General of occupied Poland, who wanted to centralize more administrative control for himself. Krüger wrote in a personal letter that he had lost honor and reputation after years of bureaucratic fighting in that post. He requested a transfer to a direct combat military command far away from the paperwork. Krüger went on to command Waffen-SS divisions in combat. On October 22, 1944, he received the Knight's Cross on Himmler's personal recommendation for commanding the Nord Division. He died around May 9, 1945, in Austria, after the German war had already officially ended. Krüger was never indicted, never arrested, never answered for a single one of the deaths he authorized during the 4 years he commanded the whole of occupied Poland. Number 8. Maria Mandl was born on January 10, 1912, in Münzkirchen, Austria, the daughter of an ordinary local shoemaker, into a Catholic family with no political history. She passed through Lichtenberg and Ravensbrück before arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau on October 7, 1942, as head of the entire women's camp. She formed an orchestra made up of prisoners, which played during the morning roll calls, the selections on the arrival ramp, and the public hangings inside the camp itself. Mandl personally signed a good portion of the selection lists that decided within seconds who would work and who would go straight to the gas chamber. One survivor testified, later before the tribunal, that in a single selection of about 5,000 people, Mandl sent 90% straight to death, beating women, men, and children with a whip, while she organized the lines on the ramp. The academic estimate, based only on the volume of lists she signed, comes close to 500,000 deaths. Arrested by the American Army on August 10, 1945, Mandl was handed over to Poland in November of 1946 to be tried there. On March 5, 1947, she confessed to part of the charges, admitting to having signed most of the death lists coming directly from Birkenau. The tribunal convicted her of crimes against humanity on December 22, 1947. She asked the Polish president of the time for clemency. The request was denied without delay, almost immediately. At Montelupich prison in Krakow, Mandl spent her final weeks of life praying and learning Polish, according to the prison administration's own records. In the neighboring cell was Stanisława Rachwałowa, an Auschwitz survivor who had been personally mistreated by Mandl at the camp. Before she died, Mandl asked her for forgiveness. Maria Mandl was hanged on January 24, 1948, at 7:32 in the morning inside Montelupich prison. She was 36 years old. She died in the same round of executions as 9 other convicted defendants from the Auschwitz trial, among them the camp commandant and the local head of the Gestapo. The orchestra she herself founded went on being remembered for decades as one of the most disturbing details of all the testimony survivors left behind about Birkenau. Number 9. Ilse Koch was born on September 22, 1906, and married Karl-Otto Koch, the commandant of Buchenwald, in 1937, still young and holding no formal position within the system. Inside the camp, she was known among the prisoners for her direct, personal cruelty. Rumors circulated that she had inmates with interesting tattoos killed, so their skin could be turned into objects like lampshades and book covers. Those specific accusations were never proven with any concrete evidence. Years after the war, Konrad Morgan, the same SS judge who had investigated her husband, gave an interview to the American historian John Toland debunking the story of the human skin objects. According to Morgan, no concrete proof ever supported that specific version, despite all the attention it later drew. Even so, the nickname stuck and stayed tied to her forever. Ilse Koch went down in history as the bitch of Buchenwald, even without a formal conviction for that exact crime. The SS's own tribunal acquitted Ilse Koch in 1944, at the same trial that sentenced her husband to death for corruption. Arrested by the Americans in June of 1945, she was tried at Dachau in 1947 and sentenced to life in prison, later reduced to 4 years in a later review of the sentence. Released in October of 1949, she was arrested again by West German authorities as soon as she got out, that very same day, and taken to trial once more, this time on German soil. Tried in Augsburg by German justice, Ilse Koch was convicted again in 1951, this time sentenced to life in prison for incitement to murder and for serious bodily harm committed inside Buchenwald. She pleaded innocent to everything, at every stage, until the end. A psychiatrist who examined her in prison described her, in an official report, as a perverted, nymphomaniac, hysterical person, hungry for power over the people around her, inside and outside the camp. Ilse Koch died at the women's prison in Eichach, in Bavaria, on September 1st, 1967, at the age of 60, 21 days before she would have turned 61. She left behind a note saying she could no longer go on that way. She spent 22 years across different prisons, 3 separate trials, and a final conviction that never formally mentioned the objects made of human skin that made her name famous around the world, decades after the war itself had ended. Number 10. Herta Oberheuser was born on May 15, 1911, in Cologne, and earned a medical degree with a specialty in dermatology. She was the only female doctor to work inside the Ravensbrück concentration camp, dedicated exclusively to female prisoners. She took part in experiments that deliberately infected prisoners with bacteria, glass, and wood in their wounds, testing the effectiveness of experimental drugs against infection under conditions no normal medical protocol would allow. After the war, Oberheuser was the only woman among the defendants of the so-called doctor's trial, conducted by an American military tribunal in Nuremberg. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison for war crimes and crimes against humanity, a sentence reduced to 10 years in January of 1951 in a later review of the case. She actually served only 5 years, being released from Landsberg prison on April 4th, 1952, officially for good behavior during her time in custody. After her release, Oberheuser set herself up as a general practitioner in the small village of Stocksee, near Kiel, in West Germany. She went back to treating ordinary patients normally, with nobody in the region knowing about her past at Ravensbrück. She even worked at a sanatorium in the area. For 4 straight years, she treated people in the most ordinary, calm way possible, as if those experiments on prisoners had never truly happened. In 1956, a Ravensbrück survivor personally recognized Oberheuser inside her own medical office. The news spread and became a public scandal across the entire region. In August of 1958, following protests organized by former prisoners, the Interior Minister of Schleswig-Holstein revoked her medical license and closed the clinic for good. Oberheuser appealed to administrative court. She lost the appeal in December of 1960, after a 12-hour hearing. Herta Oberheuser never practiced medicine again after her license was revoked. She died on January 24th, 1978, at a nursing home in Linz am Rhein at 66 years old. She spent 26 years free after leaving prison, most of them working as a real doctor, caring for ordinary people in Germany. She was only found out because one of the very survivors she had mistreated decades earlier walked into that office and recognized her face on the spot. Number 11. Elfriede Rinkel was born on July 14, 1922, in Leipzig, Germany, into an ordinary German family with no recorded political affiliation. She worked as a guard at the Ravensbrück concentration camp between June of 1944 and April of 1945, using a dog trained by the SS to control the prisoners during their daily forced labor inside the camp. In September of 1959, she emigrated to the United States and settled in San Francisco, without mentioning her service at the camp on her American visa application. In San Francisco, Elfriede met Fred William Rinkel, a German Jew who had survived the Holocaust after losing his entire family in the Nazi extermination camps. The two of them married around 1962, in a marriage that would last more than 40 years. She never told the truth about her own past during their entire time together. He never knew that his wife had worked, decades earlier, at one of the camps that killed most of his own family. The couple lived in San Francisco for more than 4 straight decades, a quiet, ordinary life. Elfriede attended synagogue alongside her husband and even made regular donations to Jewish charities in the area where they lived. Fred Rinkel died in January of 2004, never once suspecting anything about his wife's past. It was only after his death that investigators from the United States Department of Justice formally began taking an interest in her case. Elfriede's name was already engraved next to Fred's on the couple's headstone at the Jewish cemetery in San Francisco, under the Star of David, prepared in advance for the two of them. In September of 2006, at 84 years old, she was deported back to Germany, the only woman among more than 100 Nazis deported from the United States up to that specific point. She signed an agreement admitting her service at Ravensbrück. All criminal proceedings open in Germany were later closed. Elfriede Rinkel was never formally tried for any crime committed during the war. She died at a nursing home in Willich, Germany in July of 2018, at 95 or 96 years old, depending on the exact day of her death. She spent more than 40 years living as the wife, and later the widow, of a Holocaust survivor, attending Jewish ceremonies, with nobody around her knowing the truth about who she had really been during the entire war. Number 12. Kurt Franz was born on January 17, 1914, in Düsseldorf, and worked as a cook for a hotel chain before the war fully began. The prisoners of Treblinka nicknamed him Lalka, doll in Polish, because of a face too young and too harmless looking to match what he did there every day. He walked around the camp accompanied by Barry, a dog trained specifically to attack and injure prisoners on his direct command. As part of the camp's routine, Franz had a zoo and an entire recreation area built inside the extermination site itself for the SS officers to relax between shifts. Survivors described him beating and shooting prisoners for the smallest infractions, or simply setting the dog loose on them with no warning at all. In August of 1943, he became the third and final commandant of Treblinka. At the Düsseldorf trial in 1965, Franz denied having personally killed anyone during his entire time at Treblinka. He denied ever having set the dog loose on any prisoner at any specific moment. He said he had only struck one person, a single time, in the entire period he worked there. Dozens of survivors testified to exactly the opposite, describing scenes repeated over entire months, with details that matched across testimonies gathered separately. On September 3rd, 1965, Kurt Franz was sentenced to life in prison for taking part in the collective murder of at least 300,000 people inside Treblinka. The tribunal's ruling recorded a line that later became famous throughout Germany. A great part of the blood and tears that flowed in that camp could be attributed to him alone, with no need to formally share the responsibility with anyone else in that camp's chain of command. Kurt Franz was released from prison in 1993 for health reasons, after serving nearly 30 full years of the life sentence handed down in 1965. He lived 5 more years in full freedom, residing at an ordinary nursing home in reunified Germany. He died on July 4th, 1998, in Wuppertal, at 84 years old. The man the sentence itself had described as the sole owner of so much spilled blood spent the last part of his life like any ordinary, quiet German retiree. Number 13. Josef Schwammberger was born on February 14, 1912, into a modest Austrian family with no recorded military tradition. He commanded 3 forced labor camps in the Krakow district and occupied Poland between August of 1942 and the spring of 1944, Przemysl, Rozwadów, and Mielec. In Rozwadów, he personally sought out and killed a local rabbi, a crime the judge at his later trial would call one of the most despicable and repugnant of his entire career. On September 2, 1943, Schwammberger organized a mass execution at the Przyzemyśl camp. At least 500 Jewish prisoners shot in a single day by Gestapo soldiers under his supervision. Captured by French forces in 1945, he escaped custody in January of 1948 and managed to enter Argentina months later. He lived there under his own real name, with no attempt to hide his identity, and obtained Argentine citizenship in 1965, nearly 2 decades after arriving in the South American country. West Germany formally requested Schwammberger's extradition in 1973, but he went on living freely in Argentina for 14 more years. Argentine authorities finally located him on November 13, 1987, after an informant came forward for a $300,000 reward offered by the German government. His capture cost the state of Baden-Württemberg nearly 500,000 marks. After 2 years of legal dispute, he was finally extradited to Germany in May of 1990. The trial in Stuttgart lasted nearly an entire year between 1991 and 1992, with almost 100 survivors giving testimony about what they had endured under his command at the 3 camps. Schwammberger denied guilt on almost everything, admitting only to minor administrative details about the movement of prisoners between ghettos and camps. On May 18, 1992, he was convicted of 7 murders committed personally and of complicity in 32 others, receiving a life sentence in the final verdict. In August of 2002, a court in Mannheim denied Schwammberger's request for parole, citing the unusual cruelty of the crimes he had committed throughout the war. Josef Schwammberger died in prison on December 3, 2004, at 92 years old, after more than 40 years living free between his initial escape and his final capture in Argentina. Number 14. Franz Stangl was born on March 26, 1908 in Altmünster, Austria. The son of a night watchman of humble origins, he came out of the Nazi euthanasia program before being promoted within the Nazi extermination system. In April of 1942, he took command of the Sobibor camp in occupied Poland, a post he held until August of that same year, directly overseeing the arrival and extermination of thousands of Jewish prisoners coming by train from across the region. After Sobibor, Stangl was transferred to command Treblinka, a post he held until August of 1943. He habitually wore an all-white linen uniform, sewn by himself, which earned him the nickname White Death among prisoners and fellow officers. Odilo Globocnik, his direct superior in the chain of command, described him as the best camp commandant he ever had, with the greatest personal involvement in the entire extermination operation across the whole region. Arrested at the end of the war in 1945, Stangl was released 2 years later amid the common administrative confusion of that period in post-war Europe. He fled to Italy with the help of church contacts tied to the Vatican, obtained a Red Cross passport under an altered identity, and spent some time in Syria before boarding a ship to Brazil. He arrived in the country in 1951, together with his entire family, to start a new life on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, far from any European investigation. In Brazil, Stangl worked for years at the Volkswagen plant in São Paulo, registered under his own real name, with no disguise of identity whatsoever. The Austrian arrest warrant was not issued until 1961, nearly a decade after his arrival in the South American country. Tracked down by the Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal through a paid informant, he was arrested by the Brazilian Federal Police on February 28, 1967, after 16 years of living quietly on Brazilian soil. Extradited to West Germany, Stangl was tried in Dusseldorf for the deaths of approximately 900,000 people at the 2 extermination camps he commanded during the war. His defense claimed that his role had only been to oversee the collection and transport of victims' belongings, and that the true person responsible for the mass deaths had been Christian Wirth, his direct superior in the region during much of that specific period of the conflict. Sentenced to life in prison on October 22, 1970, Stangl died of heart failure at Dusseldorf prison on June 28, 1971, only 8 months after the sentence was handed down by the German tribunal responsible for the case. Before he died, he gave the writer Gitta Serrani a series of long, detailed interviews, later published in the book Into That Darkness. He was the only Nazi extermination camp commandant to be personally tried in Germany for these crimes. Number 15. Gustav Wagner was born on July 18, 1911 in Vienna, capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time. He was deputy commandant of Sobibor, nicknamed the Beast by the surviving prisoners for the cruelty he showed inside the camp every single day without exception. After the war, he was sentenced to death in absentia. In trials he never personally attended, he fled to South America together with Franz Stangl, with the help of church contacts in Europe. Wagner became a permanent resident of Brazil on April 12, 1950. In December of that same year, he received a Brazilian passport under the false name Günther Mandl, an identity he used publicly for nearly 3 straight decades. He lived quietly in the interior of São Paulo state, working as a farmer and later as a bricklayer on small construction jobs, married to a Brazilian widow who raised her own children as if they were his too. In 1978, Simon Wiesenthal identified him from a photograph taken at a birthday party for Hitler, organized near Rio de Janeiro by local Nazi sympathizers. Wagner turned himself in to the police on May 30th of that year, declaring he was the real Gustav Wagner. Stanisław Schmeisner, a Sobibor survivor who had also lived in Brazil for decades, saw the news on television and traveled personally to São Paulo to confront his own executioner face to face. Israel, Austria, and Poland all requested Wagner's extradition. The Brazilian Attorney General denied all 3 requests, one after another. On June 22, 1979, the Federal Supreme Court also rejected the request made by West Germany, ruling that the legal deadline for trying that specific type of crime had already expired under the Brazilian legal system in force at the time. Wagner remained free on Brazilian soil, with no formal charge pending. In an interview with the BBC in 1979, Wagner said he felt nothing about his own past. He called his work at Sobibor just another job, with no emotional weight attached to it at all. Over the following months, he attempted suicide at least 5 different times, without succeeding at any of them. The Brazilian press followed each new attempt closely, while the German extradition process remained hopelessly stalled in the higher courts. On October 3, 1980, Gustav Wagner was found dead with a knife driven into his chest on a rural property in Atibaia in the interior of São Paulo state, where he had been working as a caretaker for months. Police ruled out homicide. The next day, he was buried at the local cemetery in the town. Only 2 people attended the funeral, and neither of them wanted their name revealed to the press afterward.